Original story by Twilight Rex. They told me the job was simple. 6 months solo on Irontide, cataloging the decay, sketching renovation plans for the luxury resort conversion, radioing the mainland once a day to confirm I hadn't fallen down a shaft or cracked my skull on a rusted catwalk. $60,000, half up front, deposited into my account 3 days before the supply ferry dropped me on that godforsaken rock. I took it because I'm 42 years old. My knees are shot from 20 years of commercial roofing, and I needed one last big payday before my body gave out completely. The name's Harry Horton, practical guy, not prone to superstition or nerves. I've slept in half-built skyscrapers during electrical storms, worked on cell towers in wind that could peel your face off. An empty prison wasn't going to rattle me. Irontide Penitentiary squats on a blade of black rock about 4 miles off the mainland, a supermax facility that operated from 1987 to 2019 before the state finally shuttered it after the third federal investigation into guard brutality. The photos in the LLC's acquisition folder showed a brutal concrete monstrosity, 6 stories of cell blocks radiating out from a central hub like the spokes of a wheel, the whole structure designed to maximize observation and minimize human contact. 1,600 men at capacity, crammed into 6x8 cells, breathing recycled air and artificial light for 23 hours a day. The kind of place that ground people down to nothing. Now it belonged to some billionaire's holding company with plans to gut it, sanitize it, and turn it into one of those disaster tourism resorts where rich people pay $5,000 a night to sleep in a renovated cell and feel edgy. My job was to make sure the bones of the place were sound enough to support the conversion. I set up my base camp in the warden's office, top floor of the administrative tower at the prison's northern point. It was the only space in the entire facility that had ever been designed for human comfort, with actual windows overlooking the Atlantic, a private bathroom with plumbing that still functioned if you didn't mind the rust, and enough square footage to spread out my equipment without feeling like I was living in a coffin. The LLC had sent ahead a supply pallet, a space heater that glowed orange and ticked when it ran, a decent leather office chair pulled from some executive surplus warehouse, a 2-burner camping stove, freeze-dried meals in silver packets that promised to taste like beef stroganoff or chicken teriyaki, a military-grade sleeping cot, and a shortwave radio rig for daily check-ins with the mainland dispatcher. I arranged it all with the efficiency of someone who'd spent half his life in temporary housing. The blueprints went on the warden's old desk, held flat with a wrench and a roll of duct tape. The space heater went in the corner, aimed at the cot. The coffee maker, a French press I'd brought from home, went on the windowsill where I could watch the water while I waited for it to boil. Small comforts. They matter when you're alone. The storm hit on my 4th day. I woke up to the sound of the Atlantic trying to tear the prison off its foundation, waves hammering the eastern seawall hard enough that I could feel the vibration through 6 stories of concrete. The wind came in off the open ocean with nothing to break it, screaming through the shattered windows of the lower cell blocks, finding every gap and fissure in Irontide's superstructure, and turning the whole place into a massive, groaning wind instrument. I stood at the warden's window with my coffee and watched the mainland disappear behind a wall of gray, the horizon erased. The radio crackled at 0800, right on schedule. Irontide, this is dispatch. Morning check-in, Harry. You still breathing over there? Sarah, cheerful, competent, 26 years old, working the dispatch desk for the LLC's facility management contractor while she finished her degree in something I could never remember. She had the kind of voice that sounded like she was smiling even when she was reading you a list of safety violations. I keyed the transmit button. Still here, Sarah. Storm's pretty aggressive. Visibility's maybe 50 feet. Static. Then, yeah, we're seeing the same system on shore. Ferry service is suspended indefinitely. Captain says the swells are running 15 to 20 feet, and the forecast doesn't show it calming down for at least 4 days, maybe a week. You got enough supplies? I looked at the stack of silver meal packets, the 5-gallon water jugs, the propane canisters for the stove. I'm good for 3 weeks if I ration. Longer if I don't mind losing weight. Okay, good. Just sit tight and wait it out. Call if you need anything, but honestly, there's not much we can do until the weather breaks. Understood. Typical luck, getting stranded my first week here. She laughed, small and distant through the static. Could be worse. At least you've got the whole place to yourself, no roommates. Yeah, living the dream. Stay safe, Harry. Dispatch out. The radio went silent. I finished my coffee and stared out at the storm, watching the rain move in sheets across the black water. That first night, the wind found the cell blocks. I was in the warden's office with the space heater running, working through a set of structural drawings for D-block when I heard it. A low, oscillating moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, rising and falling with the gusts outside. It sounded exactly like human voices, dozens of them, wailing in unison somewhere deep in the prison's guts. My hand stopped moving across the blueprint. I sat perfectly still and listened. The sound peaked, held for 3 seconds, then dropped into a hollow whisper before building again. Not voices, just air moving through empty corridors, funneling down stairwells, resonating in the stripped cafeteria and the gutted chapel and the hollow drum of the central rotunda. Physics, acoustics, the same reason a beer bottle hums when you blow across the mouth. I went back to my drawings, but the sound didn't stop. It layered over itself, different pitches weaving in and out of harmony as the wind shifted direction, and after an hour of it, I gave up on work and just sat in the leather chair, letting the noise wash over me. The space heater ticked, the windows rattled in their frames. Somewhere far below, a piece of loose metal banged against concrete in an irregular rhythm. I realized I was cold despite the heater, a deep chill that seemed to come from inside my bones rather than the air. I checked the thermostat on the space heater, still running. I pulled a blanket around my shoulders and told myself it was just the atmosphere of the place getting into my head, the weight of all that empty concrete and the knowledge that I was alone on a rock in the middle of a storm with no way off. Just an old prison playing tricks on an old man. I killed the lights, kept the space heater running, and collapsed onto the cot without bothering to undress. The last thing I remember before sleep was the sound of the wind howling through D-block's shattered windows. I slept anyway. The storm didn't break. 5 days in, then 6, then a week. The Atlantic just kept hammering Irontide like it had a personal grudge against the place. I stopped checking the weather reports on the radio. Didn't matter. The supply ferry wasn't coming until the swells dropped below 8 feet, and the forecast showed nothing but gray static stretching out into next month. I fell into a routine because that's what you do when you're alone. Structure keeps you sane. 6 a.m. wake-up, instant coffee, oatmeal from a packet, 7 to 12, survey work, measuring corridor widths, photographing load-bearing walls, sketching floor plans for the renovation team. 12 p.m., freeze-dried lunch heated on the camping stove. 13 to 17 p.m., more measurements, more notes. 6, dinner. 7, radio check-in with Sarah. 8 to 10 p.m., review the day's work. 11 p.m., lights out. Simple, mechanical. The kind of schedule that eats days without you noticing. The exhaustion started on day 8. I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, every joint in my body stiff and throbbing, my lower back seizing up the moment I tried to sit upright on the cot. I'd slept a full 8 hours according to my watch, but my body felt like I'd spent the night loading concrete bags. I chalked it up to the cold. The space heater could only do so much against the Atlantic wind bleeding through the window frames, and downed 3 ibuprofen with my coffee. The ache didn't fade. It got worse. By day 10, I was moving like a man 20 years older, my knees grinding when I climbed the stairs between sectors, my shoulders burning from holding the clipboard and pencil. I'd measure a hallway and have to sit down afterward, breathing hard, my hands shaking. I'd collapse onto the cot and be asleep before my head settled into the pillow, dropping into a black, dreamless void that felt less like rest and more like my brain just shutting off to conserve power. I told myself it was the isolation, the relentless noise of the storm, the stress of being cut off. The human body isn't designed for this kind of solitary confinement, and my body was 42 years old and held together with scar tissue and spite. On the 12th morning, I woke up on the floor of the cafeteria, not in my cot, not in the warden's office. On the floor of the gutted cafeteria in C block, 3 sectors and 2 staircases away from where I'd gone to sleep, lying on my side on dusty concrete with my cheek pressed against the grit. The cold woke me, seeping up through my clothes and into my bones, my breath pluming in the air. I groaned and rolled onto my back, staring up at the water-stained ceiling tiles and the exposed ductwork. My first coherent thought, what the hell? My second, my back is going to be completely destroyed. I sat up slowly, every vertebra in my spine clicking into place, and looked around. The cafeteria was a massive L-shaped space, the serving counter ripped out years ago, the floor scarred with the bolt holes where the tables had been anchored. Enough dawn light was filtering through the barred windows that I could see the layout clearly, the dust patterns on the concrete, the rust stains spreading out from the drainage grates. I'd walked here, in my sleep. Down 2 flights of stairs, through the central rotunda, past the guard station, through the security door that I'd propped open with a brick 4 days ago, and into C block. 300 yards, in the dark, without waking up. I pushed myself to my feet and immediately regretted it, my lower back spasming hard enough that I had to grab the wall for support. I stood there for 30 seconds, breathing through the pain, waiting for it to dial back from excruciating to merely agonizing. I've never sleepwalked in my life. Not as a kid, not as an adult, not even during the worst stress of the divorce when I was averaging 3 hours of sleep a night and living on gas station coffee. This wasn't something my body did, but the evidence was pretty conclusive. I was here. I'd gotten here somehow. And unless there was someone else on Iron Tide, which was impossible, the ferry hadn't run in almost 2 weeks, and I'd checked every sector, every cell block, every storage room during my surveys. Then I'd walked here myself. The isolation was getting to me. The storm, the constant noise, the way the wind made the whole prison vibrate like a tuning fork. My brain was trying to cope with the sensory overload by shutting down parts of itself during sleep, and my body was just running on autopilot. Fine. Okay. Not great, but explainable. I limped back to the warden's office, climbed the stairs 1 agonizing step at a time, and downed 4 more ibuprofen before collapsing back onto the cot. I slept until 14 p.m., woke up feeling marginally less like death, and spent the rest of the day doing light work, just reviewing blueprints, no walking, no measuring. At 19 p.m., I had my check-in with Sarah. "How's the fortress holding up, Harry?" "Still standing. Roof's not leaking. I'm not dead." "That's the spirit. Weather's supposed to break in the next 72 hours, maybe. Captain says he'll try a supply run as soon as the window opens." "Good. I'm getting sick of freeze-dried lasagna." She laughed. "Hang in there. You're over the hump." Over the hump, right. I didn't tell her about the cafeteria, didn't tell her about the exhaustion or the sleepwalking or the way my body felt like it had been working a 16-hour shift every night while my brain was unconscious. It would sound insane. She'd probably call for an emergency medical evac, storm or no storm, and I'd lose the contract and the second half of my $60,000. I just needed to get through it. That night, I took precautions. I wasn't going to walk down 3 flights of stairs again and wake up on concrete. If my brain wanted to make me sleepwalk, fine, but I was going to know about it. I found a ball of kitchen twine in one of the supply crates and strung it across the inside of the warden's office door at ankle height, about 6 inches off the floor. I tied both ends to the door handle and the hinge, making it taut, then threaded 3 metal utensils from my camping mess kit onto the line, a fork, a spoon, and the folding knife, spacing them evenly. If I tried to open the door, the string would pull tight and the metal would rattle against itself and the door frame. Simple. Effective. The kind of alarm system a 12-year-old would rig to catch a sibling sneaking out. I tested it once, pulling the door open slowly. The utensils clattered loud enough to make me wince, metal banging against wood and each other in a chaotic racket that would absolutely wake me up. Perfect. I killed the lights, lay down on the cot, and stared at the ceiling. The wind was still howling through the cell blocks, and somewhere below me, metal was banging against concrete in that irregular rhythm. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, forcing my body to relax, letting the exhaustion pull me down. If I sleepwalked tonight, I'd know. The metal would wake me. I had it under control. The next night, I woke up to the smell of rust and piss, not the sterile cold of the warden's office. This was deeper, older, a concentrated reek that hit the back of my throat. My eyes opened onto complete darkness, the kind that presses against your face. I was sitting upright, back against cold concrete, legs stretched out on gritty floor. I fumbled for my flashlight in the dark, fingers scraping concrete where my pockets should have been. Nothing. I used the wall to drag myself upright, every joint in my body protesting, knees popping, back screaming. I felt the dimensions of the space by touch. 6 feet wide, 8 deep, ceiling close. A steel door somewhere ahead, solid, no window. The air felt wrong, too still, like being at the bottom of something. Sub-basement, solitary confinement. I'd mapped this section on day 9, taken 30 seconds to photograph it and leave. 24 concrete boxes carved into bedrock, designed to break men down through absolute sensory deprivation. The renovation plans didn't even include this level. I found the door by feel, running my hands across the cold steel until I located the seam. I pushed gently, expecting resistance. It moved. Just an inch, but it moved. Not locked. The door had been open the entire time, resting against the frame, but not latched. I stood there in the pitch black for 10 seconds, listening to the absolute silence of the sub-basement. No wind down here, no ambient sound, just the faint drip of water somewhere distant and my own breathing. I pulled the door open slowly, stepping into the corridor, and felt along the concrete wall until I found the stairs. The climb took forever. 5 flights in darkness, hands on the railing, testing each step. By the time I reached the warden's office, I was drenched in sweat, heart spiking so high I could feel it in my teeth. I stopped outside the door. It was closed. I stared at it for 10 seconds, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. The door was closed, completely shut, the latch engaged, exactly the way I'd left it before going to sleep. I pushed it open slowly. The string alarm was still tied from the door handle to the heavy water jug on the floor, the 3 metal tin cans hanging motionless on the twine. I crouched down and examined it in the pale morning light coming through the windows. The knots were still tight. The tension was perfect. Nothing had moved. I stepped over it carefully and looked at the cot. The blanket was pulled back where I'd gotten up, the pillow still showing the impression of my head. My boots were on the floor beside it, exactly where I'd left them. I looked down at my feet. I was wearing my boots, laced up, tight. I sat on the cot and tried to make the evidence line up with any sane explanation. The door had been closed. The alarm hadn't triggered. I'd been 5 stories below, locked in the dark. Impossible. My hands were shaking. I looked at them properly. The knuckles were raw, skin scraped away, dried blood crusted in the creases. Fingernails chipped and torn, grime underneath, two split to the quick. I flexed my fingers and felt a dozen small lacerations. I stood and my legs nearly buckled, deep exhaustion radiating from my thighs and calves. I pulled up my pant leg. Bruises forming on my shins, dark purple impact marks. My body had been doing something while my brain was unconscious. Something violent. Something sustained. That was the first time I woke up somewhere I shouldn't have been, with injuries I couldn't explain. The second time, I didn't even wake up lying down. I came to standing perfectly upright in the corner of the cafeteria, my nose 2 inches from the concrete wall, my spine rigid. My hands were interlaced tightly behind my head, fingers woven together, elbows out. The position was so specific, so deliberate that for a moment I couldn't move. My muscles had locked into it, tendons pulled taut. I stood there for 5 seconds before my brain caught up with my body, and then I jerked backward, gasping, my hands flying apart. The pose had been exact, military. Why was my unconscious body forcing me into these positions? There was someone else on Irontide. Had to be. Some squatter who'd been living in the bowels of the prison when I arrived, hiding from my surveys, waiting for me to fall asleep. They were drugging my food, my coffee, something with the water supply, slipping me sedatives strong enough that I'd black out completely while they moved my unconscious body around the facility. Some sick game, some territorial dominance display. It made sense, more sense than the alternative. I got on the radio at 9 a.m., an hour before my scheduled check-in. "Dispatch, this is Irontide. Sarah, you there? I need to talk. Now." Static. Long, empty static that went on for 30 seconds before her voice cut through, distant and flat. "Irontide, this is dispatch. Go ahead." "Sarah, I need an emergency extraction. Today. I don't care about the weather. There's someone else on this island." Silence. Then, slow, like she was reading from a script. "Negative, Irontide. Ferry service is still suspended. Swells are 12 to 15 feet. No emergency extraction is possible at this time." "You're not listening. There's someone in the prison with me. They're moving me around while I'm asleep. I woke up locked in a cell in the sub-basement. This isn't safe." Another pause, longer this time, filled with a wash of static that sounded almost like breathing. "Irontide, please confirm your location." "I'm in the warden's office, where I'm supposed to be. But last night..." Acknowledged. "I understand you're concerned, Harry, but there's nothing we can do right now. Just stay where you are and try to keep to your normal routine until the weather breaks." Her voice was wrong, completely flat, no inflection, no concern. Like she was talking to a malfunctioning piece of equipment instead of a person reporting an active threat. "Sarah, are you hearing me? Someone is drugging me and moving my body. I need extraction." "Extraction is not available. Weather conditions do not permit ferry service." "I understand you're concerned, Harry, but there's nothing we can do right now. Just stay where you are and try to keep to your normal routine until the weather breaks." "What routine? I can't work if someone is..." "Irontide, maintain position. Dispatch out." The radio went dead. I sat there with the handset in my grip, staring at the speaker, my heart pounding. That wasn't Sarah. Couldn't be. The syntax was wrong. The tone was wrong. The complete absence of human empathy in her response was wrong. But it was her voice, staticky and delayed, but definitely her voice. I put the handset down carefully and looked at the door, at my ruined hands, at the impossible alarm that should have woken me but didn't. Day 15, maybe 16. I'd stopped keeping count after the cafeteria. I tried to work. I spread the resort blueprints across the warden's desk and stared at them under the pale morning light. 2 weeks of careful measurements and architectural sketches, every corridor and load-bearing wall documented. They weren't blueprints. The paper was covered in tally marks, thousands of them. Microscopic scratches arranged in groups of 5, slashed diagonals cutting across vertical lines, packed so densely that the page looked gray from a distance. I picked up the first sheet and held it close to my face. The marks went on forever, covering every inch of the architectural grid I'd drawn underneath, obliterating the carefully measured walls and corridors and load-bearing columns. I flipped to the second page. Same thing. Third page. Fourth. 12 sheets total, every single one transformed into a counting exercise I had no memory of doing. I looked at my right hand, at the calluses on my index finger and thumb. They were raw and slightly swollen, consistent with gripping a pencil for hours at a stretch. I'd done this. My hand had done this while my brain was somewhere else. I sat down heavily in the leather chair and tried to remember the last time I'd actually looked at these blueprints, really looked at them instead of just glancing at the desk and confirming they were there. 3 days? A week? The last clear memory I had of working on these was day 8, day 9. Everything after that was gray static. How much time had I lost? I pushed the blueprints aside and checked my watch. 9:47 hours. My stomach was cramping, empty and acidic. I couldn't remember my last meal. I walked to the supply crates and pulled out one of the freeze-dried pouches, beef stroganoff according to the label, and heated water on the camping stove. The smell hit me first. Not beef, not the artificial flavoring that usually approximated meat. This smelled like rot, like something that had been sitting in a dumpster for a week, breaking down into its component parts under a hot sun. I poured the water in anyway, stirred it, let it reconstitute. The texture looked fine, gray-brown chunks in beige sauce, exactly like it was supposed to look. I lifted a spoonful to my mouth. It tasted like ash, like stale bread left sitting for days, like rust and something bitter that coated my tongue and made my throat close up. And I shoved it away. I gagged, spat it back into the pouch, and threw the whole thing across the room. It hit the wall and slumped to the floor, leaking sauce onto the concrete. I grabbed another pouch. Chicken teriyaki. Same result. The smell was wrong, the taste was worse, my body rejecting it before I could swallow. I tried the instant coffee. It tasted like dirt and copper. The water from the jug. Metallic. Flat. Wrong. I sat on the edge of the cot and focused on my breathing, trying to push down the panic that was crawling up my spine. Food poisoning. Had to be. The supply crates had been sitting in the cold for 2 weeks. The freeze-dried pouches compromised somehow, bacteria growing in the seals. I just needed to ride it out. Wait for the ferry. Get off this rock. Outside, the storm kept howling, except it wasn't howling anymore. I stood up slowly and walked to the window, listening. The wind was still there, the familiar oscillating moan that had been the soundtrack to my entire stay on Irontide. But underneath it, woven through it, was something else. A rhythm, a pattern. Metal striking metal in a regular cadence, dozens of impacts overlapping, creating a wall of sound that rose and fell with the gusts. Clang, 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 like metal cups banging against iron bars. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and stared out at the gray Atlantic, at the massive swells rolling in from the east, and told myself it was just the loose metal I'd been hearing for 2 weeks, the piece of ductwork or railing or whatever it was finally achieving some kind of resonance with the wind. Physics, acoustics, nothing more. The sound kept going, rhythmic, deliberate, almost organized. I turned away from the window and grabbed the radio handset. "Dispatch, this is Irontide. Sarah, are you there? Sarah, please, I need to speak to you specifically." Static, long, empty static that went on for 15 seconds. "Sarah? Anyone? Where the hell is everyone?" The static surged, and then a voice cut through. Not Sarah's voice. Male, harsh, distorted like it was coming through a damaged speaker. "Keep it down on the block. Face the wall. I stared at the handset. The voice was still there, buried in the static, saying something I couldn't make out. I keyed the transmit button. "Who is this? Where's Sarah? I need to speak to my dispatcher." And then the voice came back, clearer this time, close enough that I could hear the breathing between words. "Hands behind your head. Face the wall. Now." I dropped the handset like it had burned me. It clattered against the desk, the speaker still hissing static. I backed away from it, my heart hammering, and stared at the radio like it might reach out and grab me. The squatter. He'd found the radio somehow, tapped into the frequency, cut Sarah off. That was the only explanation. He'd been hiding in the lower levels, watching me, moving me around at night, and now he was done playing games. Now he was giving orders like I was an inmate in his prison. Face the wall, hands behind your head. The exact posture I'd woken up in, the exact commands a guard would give during count time. He'd been a guard here. Had to be. Someone who worked iron-tide before it closed, who'd come back when he heard about the renovation, who'd been living in the bowels of this place and didn't want to leave. Territorial, violent, completely unhinged, and I was alone with him on a rock 4 miles from shore with no way to call for help. I needed to protect myself. Barricade the door, arm myself, stay conscious. If I could just make it through the night without falling asleep, without giving him another window to drug me and move me, then maybe I could outlast him. Wait for the ferry, get help. I couldn't let myself fall asleep. I brewed the last of my coffee grounds, forcing myself to drink it despite the copper taste. Black, strong, enough caffeine to keep my heart rate elevated, my mind sharp. Then I sat in the leather chair with the maglite across my lap and stared at the barricaded door. I am Harry Horton. I am the caretaker. I am alone. I said it out loud, my voice hoarse in the empty office. The words felt slippery, like they didn't quite fit together right, but I kept saying them anyway because they were the only anchor I had left. I am Harry Horton. I am the caretaker. I am alone. I gripped the flashlight tighter and watched the door. I wouldn't sleep. I couldn't. I just had to make it through one more night. I didn't fall asleep. Hours of forcing my eyes open against fatigue, my back aching, my hands cramping around the flashlight. I just blinked. A long, heavy blink. Maybe 2 seconds, 3 at most. When my eyes opened, the lighting was wrong. Not the pale gray of dawn filtering through dirty windows. Harsh, the kind of institutional lighting that buzzes in your teeth and turns everything flat and ugly. I blinked again, trying to clear my vision, and looked around the warden's office. The leather chair was gone. I was sitting on a concrete slab. A bed, maybe, or a bench bolted to the wall. The surface was freezing against my legs, rough concrete that had never seen upholstery or padding. I looked down at my hands. The maglite was gone too. I was holding a piece of plastic, a broken spork, the kind of thing they give you when they don't trust you with metal. I'd been gripping it so hard that the cracked edge had cut into my palm, a thin line of blood welling up across the lifeline. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking, and looked at what I was wearing. Not insulated caretaker gear, not the thermal layers and work jacket I'd been living in for 2 weeks. An orange jumpsuit, paper-thin cotton, faded to the color of old rust, with a stenciled number across the back. The fabric was filthy, stained with sweat and dirt and God knows what else. I could feel it against my skin, rough and cheap and wrong. I turned in a slow circle, trying to understand what I was seeing. The warden's office was gone. The windows, the space heater, the desk, all gone. I was standing in a concrete box, 6 feet wide, 8 feet deep, bare walls covered in scratched graffiti, ceiling close enough to touch. a single fluorescent tube behind a steel grate providing harsh, buzzing light. The door was solid steel, locked from the outside, with a narrow slot at eye level. Cell 42. I was inside cell 42. The sound hit me all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. The howling storm outside the windows vanished, just gone, cut off mid-gust, replaced by something infinitely worse. Noise. Human noise. The deafening, echoing roar of an active, overcrowded prison. Hundreds of voices shouting, talking, screaming, layered over each other until it became a solid wall of sound. Heavy boots marching on metal catwalks, doors slamming, the sharp clang of batons striking iron bars, someone laughing, someone crying, someone screaming obscenities at a guard. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was everywhere, pressing against me, coming down through the ventilation shafts from the cell blocks above. This wasn't possible. Irontide had been shut down for 6 years. I'd walked every corridor. There was no one here except me. Except I hadn't done surveys. Had I? I looked at my hands again, at the calluses and scars, at the chipped fingernails packed with grime. Not the hands of a caretaker who'd been here 2 weeks. The hands of someone who'd been here much longer. I walked to the door and looked through the eye-level slot. Gray concrete wall, 3 feet away. The isolation corridor. No windows, no view of other blocks. Just concrete and the narrow slot where they'd slide meal trays. A single guard's boots visible at the far end, heavy and black, pacing slowly past the other cells. Solitary confinement. I backed away from the door and my shoulder hit the wall. Cold concrete, solid, real. The smell, sweat and concrete dust and industrial cleaner. Undeniable. The storm had been background noise. This was physical assault. The radio on the desk was gone. In its place, low on the wall near the floor, was a rusted ventilation grate. As I stared at it, a voice came through from the other side. Raspy and tired, from the cell next door. "Hey, 8140, you awake in there?" I opened my mouth to respond and nothing came out. My throat had closed up completely, my lungs refusing to pull air. 8140. That was my number, my designation. I'd seen it stenciled on the jumpsuit when I looked down, white letters on orange fabric across my chest. Not Harry Horton, not the caretaker, just a number. The voice came again, patient and slow. "I know you're up. I can hear you breathing. You back with us, or you still off in a la-la land?" The memories came back. Not all at once, in pieces. Fragments I'd been holding underwater for 12 years, finally surfacing. The crime, the violence, the trial, the verdict. Life without the possibility of parole. The transfer to Irontide. The intake process. The cell assignment. Cell 42. Solitary confinement. 6 by 8 feet, 23 hours a day, every day for 12 years. 12 years. I pressed my nose against the freezing concrete, fingers interlaced tightly behind my head. The posture of a man with no way out. Behind me, the cell block roared. 100 men screaming, heavy boots marching on metal grates, steel batons smashing against iron doors. The horrific, deafening reality of a life sentence with no parole. The smell of rust and ancient sweat was suffocating. My conscious mind couldn't hold the weight of it. I wouldn't let it. I squeezed my eyes shut, hard enough to make my vision spark. "Typical luck," I whispered to the cold gray wall. "Getting stranded here my first week." I focused all my willpower on the noise. I took the chaotic, overlapping screams of the inmates and forced them to stretch, flattening them out until they became a low, oscillating moan. The sound of a massive storm tearing through shattered windows. I took the violent, rhythmic clang of the guard's baton and turned it into a loose piece of metal ductwork, banging harmlessly in the gale. The suffocating stench of the prison dissolved into sea salt and old paper. I didn't lower my hands. I didn't step away from the wall. I just kept my eyes tightly closed, letting the freezing air of the cell wash over me like an Atlantic draft. I am Harry Horton. I am the caretaker. I am alone. I listened to the howling storm, and I waited for the ferry. Hey guys, Rex here. Just wanted to drop a quick personal note at the end of this one. YouTube isn't exactly a huge fan of this kind of mature psychological horror and have unfortunately demonetized the channel. It's frustrating, but I love creating these videos for you all and I want to keep them going. I went ahead and created a Ko-fi, so if you've got a couple of bucks to spare and want to support the channel directly, the link is down in the description. It is totally optional, so please don't feel obligated. Just watching the videos to the end, leaving a comment, and subscribing helps more than you know. Thank you guys so much for the support, and stay safe out there.